blood on the rocks, and a trail only a desperate cub could lead humans to. A tiny lion cub stumbled out of the desert, crying with a desperation no wild animal should ever have to feel. His trembling paws pulled rescuers toward a narrow crevice, where his pregnant mother lay dying, trapped and fading fast. No one knew it yet, but that cub's desperate cries would spark one of the most unforgettable rescues they'd ever face. Riley Thompson had worked these desert edges for years, yet that morning felt different the moment she stepped out of her truck. The wind slid low across Henderson Valley, dragging with it the dry scent of sagebrush and dust. She was checking the GPS collars of a small antelope herd. Routine work, quiet work, the kind that let her breathe in the stillness. But then she heard it. At first it sounded like a distant hitch in the wind, a strained rustle swallowed by the canyon walls. She paused, lifting her hand to silence the soft beeping of her receiver. The sound came again, higher this time, fragile, breaking, almost like a child's sob echoing across the barren stones. Riley's stomach tightened. No animal she knew made a sound like that. Not a coyote pup, not a fox kit, not anything native to this valley. She took a few steps forward, listening hard. The cry rose again, trembling, desperate, then trailed off into a dry, breathless whimper. Something was suffering. Something very young. Riley followed the sound down a narrow path carved by centuries of flash floods. The canyon opened into a shallow basin where sunlight hit the rocks in shimmering waves. That was when she saw movement. A tiny body stumbling out from behind a clump of brittle bush, its legs shaking violently. A lion cub. Dust-covered, dehydrated, and barely able to stand. Her breath caught. There were no prides anywhere near this region. None had been reported in months. A cub alone here was wrong, dangerously wrong. The little one blinked up at her, its eyes raw and red from crying. It took 2 struggling steps toward her, wobbling as its paws slipped on loose gravel. Then, with a soft, broken cry, it pressed its head against her boot. Riley knelt slowly, keeping her voice gentle, the way she did when calming young rescues. But this cub didn't need coaxing. It shoved its small body against her leg, tugging at her pant cuff with trembling jaws, then stumbling backward as though begging her to follow. Riley's chest tightened. Whatever this little one had gone through, it wasn't fear that drove it toward her. It was desperation. She touched its fur lightly. Heat radiated off the cub's body, too hot for a healthy animal. It struggled to breathe evenly. "Easy, sweetheart," she whispered. "I've got you." But the cub pulled away again, staggering toward the canyon wall, letting out a hoarse, pleading cry. Riley rose to her feet. The message was unmistakable. This cub wanted her to come with him. She grabbed her radio. "Mark, I need you in Henderson Valley now. I've got a lone cub in distress. And Mark, he's trying to lead me somewhere." Static hummed in her ear before Mark Delaney's steady voice answered, "On my way. 10 minutes out." Riley followed the cub through a tight bend in the canyon. Every few steps it looked back at her, as though checking she hadn't given up. The air grew heavier, thick with a tension Riley couldn't quite name. It wasn't the fear of predators or the unease of approaching a den. It was something deeper, an instinctive pull that echoed in the cub's strained cries. The cub's strength began to fail. He sank to his knees, chest heaving, and Riley rushed forward to scoop him gently into her arms. He didn't fight her. He just sagged into her chest, small paws curled, breath rasping with exhaustion. But even from her arms, he let out another thin cry in the same direction he'd been leading. "Okay," she murmured softly. "I'm here. I'm coming. Show me." The wind pushed warm sand across her boots as she stepped deeper into the valley. The silence around her grew strange, too still, too heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The cub whimpered again, a sound carrying both fear and determination, and then Riley understood the shift in her gut, the quiet dread beneath her ribs. This cub wasn't lost. He hadn't wandered off. He was calling for help. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the rocks and shadows, someone, his mother, was waiting. Or dying. Or both. Riley held the cub tighter against her chest, whispering steady words more for herself than for him. The wind curled through the canyon once more, carrying with it the faintest scent of something Riley recognized too well: stress, sweat, blood, and heat. Something was terribly wrong up ahead, and the cub knew it. Riley could feel it in the way his small body tensed against her chest, in the way his paws twitched toward the dark, narrowing path ahead. His breaths were shallow, frightened, but determined, as if every ounce of strength left in him existed for one purpose alone: to bring her to whatever waited deeper in the canyon. The wind dropped suddenly, leaving the air strangely hollow, as if the desert itself had stepped aside to let something else move through. Riley adjusted her hold on the cub and pressed forward, stepping over loose stones and sun-bleached branches. The valley walls rose higher with each turn, their shadows pulling longer, colder. What had begun as a morning field check now felt like walking into the heart of a secret, one carved by fear, urgency, and the desperate cries of a little life clinging to hope. A faint rumble of an engine echoed behind her. Mark's truck. Riley turned briefly, spotting his figure hurrying down the rocky path, a medical pack slung over his shoulder. Relief swept through her, but only for a moment. The cub whimpered again, directing her attention forward, to the tight crack between two towering slabs of rock. "What do we have?" Mark called out, slowing his pace as the terrain grew uneven. Riley angled her body so he could see the cub. "Found him alone," she said, keeping her voice low and steady. "Dehydrated, exhausted. And, Mark, he brought me here. He's trying to lead us." Mark's brows pulled tight. "Lead us? A cub this young shouldn't even approach humans, much less drag one out here." "I know." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That's what scares me." They reached the narrow gap in the rock, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Riley squeezed through first, careful not to jostle the cub. As the passage opened again, the ground changed. Fine dust turned to scraped stone. Rough grooves etched across the surface like something large had slid or been dragged. Mark crouched down beside one long, jagged scrape. He touched the edge of the stone, feeling the fresh roughness. "These are recent," he murmured. "Hours old at most." The cub let out a small, pained yelp and squirmed in Riley's arms. She followed his gaze downward. Tiny claws were cracked and packed with reddish dust. Riley's stomach twisted. "He's been running," she said softly. "A long way, and fast." Mark nodded grimly. Something terrified him, or hurt his mother. The path twisted again, revealing a scatter of pebbles stained a rusty brown. Riley felt her pulse quicken as she knelt to examine them. The cub stretched toward the stains, nose trembling. Blood. Not much, but enough to tell a story. "Riley," Mark said quietly, "there's more." She followed his gaze to a cluster of rocks, their sharp edges marked with frantic claw strikes, deep and desperate. Something, or someone, had fought here, fought hard. The cub wriggled, trying to escape Riley's arms. She knelt slowly and set him down. His legs wobbled under him, but the little lion forced himself forward, letting out a hoarse, urgent cry. He walked only a few feet before stumbling. Riley was there instantly, her hands gentle around his sides. Yet even in his weakness, the cub stretched his paw toward a dark crevice ahead. A cold prickle ran across Riley's neck. "That's a den spot," Mark said, straightening. "But it's too narrow. No adult lion should be able to fit comfortably in there." "Unless she wasn't trying to fit," Riley whispered. unless she fell. The cub cried again, louder this time, frustrated that his voice couldn't reach farther, couldn't pull his mother back from wherever she was trapped. Riley and Mark exchanged a glance that held the same truth neither wanted to say out loud. Whatever happened next would change everything. Riley edged closer to the crevice, lowering herself onto her knees. The air seeping from the gap was warmer than the desert air, thick with the scent of stress and something else, something sharp and metallic. She angled her flashlight inside. The beam illuminated deep scratches along the inner walls, hair snagged on broken stone, and the faintest shimmer of fresh blood further back. "She's in there," Riley whispered. "She has to be." Mark knelt beside her. "Riley, if she's injured and cornered, this could be dangerous." "She's not dangerous right now," Riley answered, her voice steady but trembling around the edges. "She's dying, and her cub brought us here because he knew he couldn't help her alone." Mark didn't argue. He saw it too, the unnatural bravery in a cub that should have been hiding from the world, the desperation that had pushed him to trust humans against every instinct he carried. Riley reached out and placed her hand gently against the stone, as if the lion on the other side could feel her presence. The cub crawled close, pressing his head against the crevice, letting out a small, trembling moan. It was the kind of sound that tugged at something deep inside you, an ache that felt ancient and human. Mark exhaled slowly. "All right, we go in, but we do this carefully." Riley nodded and scooped the cub up again, holding him close as she rose. "We follow him," she said quietly, "wherever he needs us to go." She stepped deeper into the canyon shadows, the cub clinging to her shirt with what little strength he had left. The marks on the rocks grew more violent. The air grew heavier. The path grew narrower. Whatever waited beyond the next bend was the heart of the cub's fear and his hope. And they were walking straight toward it. The canyon narrowed into a jagged throat of stone, swallowing light and sound in a way that made Riley's pulse throb in her ears. The cub clung to her shirt with weakening paws, his breath trembling with each small exhale. He wasn't guiding them anymore. He was bracing himself. Riley eased forward, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. Mark stayed close behind, one hand on her shoulder, the other gripping his flashlight. The air within the crevice felt heavier with each step, carrying the sharp scent of stress and something older, something raw. As the path widened into a dim hollow, the beam of Riley's light fell upon a shape that stopped her breath cold. The lioness. She lay wedged between two slanted boulders, her massive body twisted in a way no living creature should ever have to endure. Her chest rose in shallow, uneven pulls. Her tongue hung slightly from her mouth, dry and pale. Her sides trembled with every labored breath. Even from several feet away, Riley could feel the heat radiating from her body. Far too hot, dangerously hot. The cub let out a sound Riley would never forget, a tiny broken cry that cracked across the stone chamber. The lioness stirred faintly. Her eyelids fluttered, but she couldn't open them fully. She couldn't lift her head. She couldn't even respond to her baby's voice. "Oh God," Riley whispered, dropping to her knees. "She's barely hanging on." Mark lowered beside her, quiet but urgent. His years of field rescue showed instantly in the way he assessed her breathing, her posture, the discoloration of her gums. "Severe dehydration," he murmured. "High fever. She's in distress. And she's pregnant. She's losing strength fast." The cub pulled himself from Riley's arms and staggered toward his mother. His tiny front legs buckled midway, sending him collapsing against her foreleg. He pushed his face into her fur, whimpering softly, pleading, apologizing, begging all at once. The lioness twitched weakly, a flicker of instinct still trying to comfort her child. Riley swallowed hard against the sting in her throat. "He tried to get help," she whispered. He ran all this way for her. Mark nodded, his face grim. And without him, no one would have found her in time. The lioness's breathing hitched, her ribs heaving in shallow bursts. The sounds became more strained, more desperate, like her lungs were fighting a losing battle. Riley crawled closer, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, talking with a steady, calm tone. "It's all right, girl. We're here. We're going to help you." The lioness didn't move her head, didn't lift her paw, but her ear twitched, a faint acknowledgement. It was enough to send a wave of determination through Riley's chest. Mark shifted, examining the rock pinning the lioness's lower body. "She didn't fall," he said quietly. "She crawled in here, probably trying to find a cool place to rest when the fever hit. And then she got stuck." Riley traced her flashlight along the floor. Claw marks etched deep into the stone showed exactly where the lioness had struggled, scraping, pulling, twisting, until her body couldn't keep going. She had fought the rocks with a pregnant belly, fought exhaustion, fought heat, fought for her cub. But eventually, even a mother's strength breaks. The cub nestled closer, pressing his head to hers, letting out another soft cry. Riley felt tears burn her eyes. He thought he lost her, Mark. He really thought she was dying. Mark exhaled shakily. "She might, if we don't act fast." The lioness shuddered violently, her back legs kicking a weak, involuntary spasm. Mark leaned in, his voice tight. "Her temperature's climbing. And look, muscle tremors. She's going septic. She needs fluids now." Riley opened her pack with trembling fingers. The space was tight, the rocks cramped, but they worked quickly. Mark lifted the lioness's head just enough to slide a padded cloth beneath it, giving her a softer angle to breathe. Riley set a portable fan on the ground, aiming cool air toward her face and chest. But the lioness reacted suddenly, her body jolting as a wave of pain ripped through her. Her claws dug into the dirt, scraping hard enough to send grit flying. The cub yelped and backed away, terrified. "She's in agony," Mark murmured. "Riley, she's not just sick. She's trying to give birth." Riley froze. The reality hit like a blow to the chest. The lioness wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for the lives inside her. Riley steadied her breathing and reached for the cub, pulling him back gently and holding him close to keep him calm. His tiny body trembled against her arm, his soft cries muffled against her shirt. Mark inspected the lioness's abdomen with careful hands, his voice breaking its calm. "Strong contractions. She's been in labor for hours, maybe longer. She's exhausted, barely conscious." The lioness's breath rattled as another contraction hit. Her muscles seized, then released with a weak groan. Riley squeezed her eyes shut. "She can't do this alone." "She won't have to," Mark said. "But we need more equipment, and we need to move her out of here. We can't deliver like this, not in a crevice." Riley scanned the narrow chamber. The walls pressed too close. The angle was too sharp. They couldn't maneuver properly. They needed space, air, stability. "Mark," she whispered, "she'll die if we try moving her." "And she'll die if we don't," he answered softly. For a moment, only the cub's soft, broken sobs filled the space. Then Riley wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "We won't let her die here. But we need help." She grabbed her radio, her voice steady but urgent. "Ava, we found the mother. She's alive, but barely. She's pregnant, in distress, possibly infected. We need the ultrasound kit and the emergency fluids. We're in the south crevice. Hurry." The canyon swallowed her voice, but the radio crackled back a moment later. Ava's voice trembled. "On my way. Hang in there." Riley set the radio aside and looked at the cub, who was still pressed against her arm, staring wide-eyed at his mother. She held him a little tighter. She's still fighting, Riley whispered to him. She's holding on for you. The lioness let out a low, faint exhale that barely reached her child. But it was enough for him to lift his head, eyes hopeful despite their fear. Riley placed a hand on the lioness's hot flank, feeling the uneven tremors beneath her palm. You're not alone anymore, she whispered. We're going to get you out of here. In the dim hollow of stone and shadow, among the dust and the fading light, a young cub leaned against his mother, waiting for help. Riley and Mark knelt beside them, steady and determined. And somewhere outside, racing through the desert heat, help was coming. The lioness's breaths grew shallower by the minute, each inhale trembling through her body as if she were fighting an invisible weight pressing against her chest. Her sides rose and fell in uneven waves, and her tail twitched only when the pain spiked sharply through her abdomen. Riley kept her hand against the lioness's flank, trying to offer some sense of grounding. The cub nestled in her lap now, exhausted from his earlier cries, resting his head on Riley's arm. Every so often, he lifted his gaze toward his mother with a soft whimper, as if pleading silently for her to stay awake. Mark checked the small pulse at the base of the lioness's jaw again, frowning as the rhythm faltered. We're running out of time, he murmured. Her fever is climbing, and with that pregnancy, she's in real danger. Before Riley could answer, the sound of boots scraping against stone echoed from behind them. Ava appeared at the mouth of the crevice, breathless, cheeks flushed from the run through the desert. She carried a heavy emergency pack on her shoulder and had the portable ultrasound kit strapped across her chest. I came as fast as I could, she said, kneeling beside them. Is she still with us? Barely, Mark replied. We need to cool her down and get fluids started right now. Ava worked quickly, unzipping the pack and pulling out a canteen son of chilled water, IV fluids, gauze, and antiseptic wipes. Riley shifted to help as Mark prepped the lioness's front leg, brushing aside the dusty fur to find a vein. The environment was far from ideal, cramped, dim, uneven, but they had no choice. The lioness let out a low rumble when the cold alcohol wipe touched her skin, a sound filled more with fear than aggression. Riley leaned closer, whispering in a soft, calming voice. You're all right. We're here. We're helping you. Stay with us. Mark inserted the needle swiftly, but gently. The cub startled at the lioness's small flinch and buried his face against Riley's arm again. She stroked his head slowly, feeling the tension ripple through his tiny body. Ava switched on the portable fan, directing a steady wave of air across the lioness's face and neck. Her temperature is way too high, she muttered. We need to keep this cool air on her while the fluids work. Mark nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Let's try to get an ultrasound reading. I want to know what we're dealing with. Ava set the cub aside gently, so Riley could help hold the lioness steady. The little one didn't want to leave his mother, of course. He whimpered, tried to climb back, but Riley cupped him in both hands and held him close, whispering reassurance. The lioness's body trembled again, a strong contraction that made her hind legs spasm. Ava applied gel to her abdomen and began moving the probe slowly, eyes fixed on the tiny screen lit with a bluish glow. The silence in the crevice deepened, stretching thin and tight as the image flickered to life. There, Ava whispered. I see one. 2, Mark leaned in. 3 cubs, just like we thought. Riley felt the cub in her arms go still, as if listening. Ava pointed at the screen. 2 heartbeats are strong, but this one, she tapped the far corner. This rhythm is faint, slower than it should be. Mark let out a slow breath. The fever's affecting them. If the mother's temperature keeps rising, it'll start shutting down the oxygen supply. We need to stabilize her fast. The lioness suddenly gasped, her entire body jerking as another contraction seized her. Dust scattered around them. Mark steadied her shoulder gently, speaking in a low, soothing tone. Easy. Easy. We know you're hurting. We're here. Riley felt the cub tremble harder. His eyes were wide now, afraid, confused, desperate. "He knows," she whispered. "He can feel everything she's going through." "Yes," Ava said softly. "And he's already been through so much just trying to find help." Mark checked the IV line again, adjusting the flow. "She's taking the fluids well. That should help with her blood pressure. But her fever isn't going down yet." Riley glanced at the narrow, stifling rock walls around them. The air was thick and unmoving. "This place is too hot," she said. "Too tight. It's trapping her body heat." "I know," Mark replied. "We need to get her out of here. But she's too weak. We have to stabilize her first before moving her, or she won't survive the transport." Another tremor ran through the lioness. Ava gripped the probe, her voice tightening. "Her heart rate is dipping." Mark cursed under his breath and reached for another IV bag. Riley held the cub close, keeping him from seeing the worst of his mother's suffering. Her own heart ached at the thought of what he had witnessed on his terrifying run through the valley to find help. "What else can we do?" Riley asked softly. Mark paused only a moment. "Cool her body, get oxygen flowing, and pray these fluids start working. After that, we try to deliver her somewhere safer. She won't be able to give birth in this crevice." Ava wiped sweat from her forehead. "We need to get the stretcher ready outside. When she's stable enough, we'll bring it in." Riley nodded, shifting the cub to her other arm. His strength was fading. His small head drooped heavily against her shoulder, but his gaze never stopped drifting toward his mother. "We're going to save her," Riley whispered, brushing the cub's ear gently. "We're not leaving her here." As Mark adjusted the fan again, a thin breeze lifted dust into the fading light. The lioness's eyes fluttered once, weak but aware. She released a faint, barely audible exhale, and the cub let out a soft cry in response, recognizing it instantly. That moment, fragile, trembling, filled with the last threads of a mother's strength, tightened every resolve in the room. "We move fast," Mark said, "because she's fighting with everything she has left." Riley looked down at the cub, then at the lioness, then at the deepening shadows stretching across the canyon floor. In the heart of the desert, with the sun sliding low and the air heavy with heat and fear, a small family clung to the edge of survival, and the rescuers were their only chance back into the light. Riley steadied her breath as she held the cub closer, feeling his tiny chest flutter against her arm like a frightened bird. The lioness lay stretched before them, her breaths now thin and ragged, her body trembling with every contraction that rippled across her swollen abdomen. The cool air from the portable fan brushed along her fur, but it did little to still the fever burning beneath her skin. Mark glanced at Riley and Ava, a silent understanding passing between them. This was no longer just a field rescue. This was a fight against time itself. "Let's check the cubs again," he said quietly, pulling the ultrasound unit closer. "We need to know how they're holding up." Ava knelt beside the lioness, wiping away dust and sweat from the gel-covered area on her belly. The lioness winced at the touch, a faint growl rumbling through her chest, before dissolving into a weak wheeze. Riley reached out instinctively, brushing her fingers along the lioness's flank, whispering the same soothing reassurance she'd offered dozens of terrified animals over the years. "You're not alone," she murmured softly. "We're right here." The cub in her arms lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching as he tried to follow his mother's faint sounds. He whimpered and pressed his face into Riley's elbow, as though afraid that even the act of listening might be too much for him. A faint static crackled from the small ultrasound screen as Ava guided the probe slowly across the lioness's abdomen. The cave-like hollow of stone fell silent, except for the hum of the fan and the soft static. Then images began to form, small shapes curled tight inside the mother, tiny hearts flickering like distant stars. "There," Ava said, voice barely louder than a breath. "That's one of them." Mark leaned in, his expression changing, shifting from clinical focus to something deeper, more urgent. "Heartbeat is strong," he said. "That's good." Ava moved the probe slightly. A second heartbeat appeared, thumping steadily in the tint of blue-gray light. Riley exhaled shakily, relief washing over her like a warm tide, though it was short-lived. "Now, where's the third?" Ava whispered, sliding the probe carefully. The cub in Riley's arms lifted his head again, as if sensing the shift in the air. "There," Mark said quietly. But the rhythm on the screen pulsed faintly, slower, weaker. Riley felt her heart sink. "That heartbeat doesn't look right." Mark nodded grimly. "It's too slow. The stress, the fever, it's affecting oxygen flow. If the mother's temperature rises even a bit more, that little one might not make it." The lioness's body seized again as another contraction rolled through her. Her paws flexed, claws scraping against the ground as a dry, broken sound escaped her throat. Riley tightened her hold on the cub, whispering calming words while her own voice shook. Ava checked the readings again. 2 of the cubs are fighting strong, but the third, we have to stabilize her before he loses consciousness. The lioness opened her eyes just a sliver, unfocused but present. She made a faint rumbling noise, almost like a low call, but it faded too quickly. Her strength was disappearing inch by inch, moment by moment. Riley felt tears threaten, but blinked them away. "We can't lose her," she whispered, "or any of them." Mark pulled another bag of fluids from the pack, adjusting the drip line with steady hands. "Her blood pressure is still low, but holding. If we can get her fever down, even a little, we improve their chances." Ava angled the fan again, allowing more cool air to brush across the lioness's abdomen. "Her skin is burning up. That alone puts her babies in danger." The cub whined softly, staring at his mother's face. His small paw reached out weakly, touching her muzzle. The lioness let out a faint grunt, responding as best she could. It was a moment so gentle, so heartbreakingly tender, that Riley had to look away for a second just to steady herself. Mark pressed 2 fingers lightly against the lioness's neck. "Her pulse just dipped again." Riley tightened her grip on the cub, her voice barely holding steady. "So what now?" "We fight harder," Mark said. "We keep cooling her. We keep those fluids going. And we watch those heartbeats like our lives depend on it." Ava moved the probe back to the third cub, her brow furrowed. "The weak one. It's still there. Still trying. But we're running on minutes, maybe less." Riley leaned her forehead against the cub's tiny head, whispering to him, "Your family's holding on. Don't give up on them." The lioness took another ragged breath, her ribs trembling beneath her fevered skin. The contractions grew further apart but more intense, as if her body was fighting itself just to keep going. Mark steadied her shoulder. "Easy. Just breathe." The ultrasound beeped faintly, echoing off the canyon walls. The 2 strong heartbeats flickered confidently. The third wavered. A flicker, a struggle, a plea for the tiniest chance. Ava whispered, "It's not giving up. Not yet." Riley nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Then neither are we." The lioness let out a low exhale, a sound of exhaustion, but also a sound of something deeper, something still holding on. Riley squeezed the cub gently, feeling him tremble with fear and hope all at once. Mark looked between them, then toward the cave entrance where the last of the daylight faded. "We need to get her out," he said quietly, "but only after we stabilize her enough to move." For a moment, the canyon held nothing but the hum of the fan and the struggle of a mother fighting for 3 small lives inside her. Then Riley spoke, steady and soft. "We stay until they're safe, all of them." In the dim, stony hollow of Henderson Valley, the ultrasound flickered on, offering 3 tiny, flickering heartbeats. One strong, one steady, one hanging by a fragile thread, yet still fighting. And so the rescuers fought with them. The heat pressing in from the canyon walls felt heavier with every minute, as if the desert itself were leaning closer, watching their struggle with a silent, ancient patience. Riley held the cub securely against her chest, his trembling body pressed to hers as though he were clinging to the only warmth and comfort left in his world. Every time his mother groaned or twitched, he flinched and buried his face into Riley's arm. Mark leaned over the portable monitor, jaw clenched tight. Her pressure just dipped again. Ava checked the IV line. Fluids are running, but her fever is pushing back against everything we're doing. The lioness let out a low, strained exhale, one so thin it barely moved her chest. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a distant glimmer of awareness before closing again. Riley moved closer, speaking softly, steadying her voice for the mother's sake as much as her own. "You're doing so well. Stay with us, sweetheart. Your babies need you." The lioness's ear twitched faintly. The cub responded by crying out again, a weak little sound that trembled through the crevice. It was as if he were trying to reassure her in return, even with his limited strength. The moment was tender, but it was also terrifying, because tender moments like these often came right before things went terribly wrong. A sudden alarm from the monitor broke the quiet. Mark snapped his gaze to the screen. Her heart rate. "Riley, it's dropping." Ava's breath hitched. "No, no, no. Not yet." Riley felt her own pulse spike. The cub pushed against her chest as if sensing the danger, his body tight and trembling. Mark knelt beside the lioness, checking her pulse manually. "Shallow. Too shallow." He grabbed the adrenaline syringe from the kit. "We need to help her the heart before it stops." The cave echoed with the hollow cry of the cub as Riley held him back. She shielded him with her arm, whispering with trembling lips, "It's okay. They're helping her. Hold on, little one." The lioness's body stiffened, muscles seizing as a wave of pain ripped through her. Her paws scraped against the stone, creating a gritty scratching sound that echoed off the walls. She gasped. Then everything inside her went still. Mark froze. She's flatlining. The world around Riley stopped. The heat, the dust, the fading daylight. It all pressed into one single suffocating moment. "No," Riley whispered, voice cracking. "Not yet. Don't give up." Ava's eyes widened. "Mark, now!" He didn't hesitate. He injected the adrenaline into her muscle and positioned his hands along her ribs, just behind her foreleg. He pushed firmly, rhythmically, counting under his breath. Sweat slid down his temple as he worked. Come on, breathe." The cub tried to lunge toward his mother, but Riley held him tightly. His cries grew louder, thinner, breaking into desperate squeaks that echoed through the canyon like tiny shards of grief. Ava looked at the monitor again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing yet," Mark kept pressing. "Come on, girl. You're stronger than this. Fight for them." Riley swallowed hard, tears burning her eyes. The canyon felt smaller than ever, stone closing in, the air tightening with every second. The lioness's chest remained still. Then, a twitch, a flutter beneath Mark's hands, a faint, shaky inhale, a blip on the screen. Ava gasped. "We've got something! She's coming back!" Mark exhaled a trembling breath. "Come on, girl. Keep it going." The lioness's chest rose again, weak but real. The monitor beeped once, then again, no longer flat, but a fragile rhythm finding its way back from the edge. The cub let out a soft, broken cry, as if answering the miracle. Riley pressed her cheek to the little one's head, whispering, "She's fighting. She heard you." The lioness's breathing settled into shallow but consistent pulls. Her paw twitched, brushing weakly against the stone. She wasn't out of danger, not by a long shot, but she had clawed her way back from the brink once more. Mark leaned back, running a hand over his face. That was too close. Ava nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. If it happens again, we might not get her back. Riley took a deep breath, wiping her cheeks quickly before the cub could feel her shaking. Then we stay with her. We don't let her slip away again. Another contraction shot through the lioness, and her back legs jerked involuntarily. Ava steadied her, keeping the fan angled just right. Her body's exhausted. She can't keep doing this much longer. Mark checked the ultrasound again. 2 strong heartbeats. 1 faint, flickering, struggling, but still there. She and that little one are connected, Mark said quietly. If her body goes into shock again, that third cub won't make it. Riley swallowed the knot in her throat. So we make sure she doesn't. The lioness shuddered as another contraction pulsed through her. She groaned softly, the sound thin and exhausted, but undeniably alive. The cub responded with a tiny mewl that echoed through the hollow like a vow. His mother had fought her way back for him, and he would stay with her until the very end. As the sun dipped behind the canyon walls and the shadows deepened, Riley, Mark, and Ava gathered closer around the lioness, 3 humans fighting beside a fragile family, hanging on by threads of hope. There, in the fading light, they made a silent promise. They would not lose her. They would not lose the babies inside her. Not tonight. Not while there was still even the faintest heartbeat left to fight for. Riley repeated those words silently as she held the trembling cub tight against her chest. His small body was warm, fragile, shuddering with every shaky breath. Beneath her palms, she could feel a faint tingle in his tiny muscles, fear, exhaustion, and something else entirely. Hope, thin but stubborn, refusing to die even as the shadows deepened. The lioness lay stretched across the dusty stone floor, the faint rise and fall of her chest barely visible in the dim light. The portable fan hummed steadily beside her, pushing cool air across her fevered skin. Mark kept one hand resting near her ribs, feeling for each breath, counting, memorizing the fragile rhythm as if willing it to stay steady. Ava hovered nearby, checking the monitor, adjusting the IV drip, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her sleeve. The canyon had gone quiet around them. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Mark broke the silence first. Her heart is stabilizing, he murmured, keeping his voice low. Weak, but holding. Riley let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She pressed her cheek against the cub's head and whispered softly, "She's still with you, baby. She's still fighting." The cub lifted his head, his eyes big and glassy. He stared at his mother's still form, ears twitching every time her breath hitched. Riley could feel his fear melt slightly at the sound of his mother's faint exhale. Even in her condition, the connection between them was unbroken, thin as spider silk, but unbreakable. Another contraction rippled through the lioness, making her hind legs jerk. Her claws scraped weakly against the rocky ground, and her back arched slightly in pain. She let out a low, pained moan that reverberated through the tight crevice. Ava leaned in, her voice trembling. Her contractions are closer together. She's trying. Her body is still trying to deliver. Mark nodded grimly. Her system is fighting itself. Fever, dehydration, labor, she's pushing past her limits. Riley's brows tightened. What does that mean for the cubs? Mark hesitated only a heartbeat before answering. It means they're running out of time. A heavy wave of dread washed over Riley. The cub pressed closer to her, as if absorbing her fear. She held him tighter, offering the steadiness he desperately needed. Ava grabbed a cool pack from the kit and gently placed it against the lioness's abdomen. The lioness flinched, then relaxed slightly, a small sign that the cooling helped for at least a moment. Mark checked the ultrasound again. 2 heartbeats remained strong, flickering with resilience. The third, though, its tiny rhythm seemed to fade, surge faintly, fade again. A fragile, flickering flame caught in a storm. Riley swallowed hard. That one's getting weaker, isn't it? Mark didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. And unless we get her stabilized enough to move her out of this crevice, that little one may not survive. Another contraction seized the lioness. Her entire body trembled violently, then collapsed in a shuddering heap. The cub squeaked and tried to launch himself forward, but Riley held him back with a gentle firmness, whispering, "Easy, sweetheart. They're helping her. You're helping her." Mark leaned closer, his voice firm but calm. "She's hanging on because she knows he's here." Ava nodded. "And because of you, too," she added softly toward Riley. "She trusts you." Riley blinked away sudden tears. "Then we don't let her down." Mark repositioned the probe again. "I'm going to check the placenta and see if we're dealing with oxygen loss." Riley watched the screen, her breath shallow. Ava's hand hovered at the lioness's side, ready to steady her if she reacted. The screen flickered with static before resolving into a faint, almost ghostly image of the third cub's small, curled body. Its heart pulsed again, slow, too slow, but pulsing. A whisper of life. Ava exhaled shakily. "It's still there. That heartbeat is still fighting." Riley reached out, resting a gentle hand along the lioness's neck. "Come on, Mama," she whispered. "Don't stop now. Your babies aren't giving up." The lioness let out a weak, breathy rumble. It wasn't a roar or even a growl, more a whispering sound of pain and recognition. The cub in Riley's arms whimpered and reached his paw toward her once more. Mark checked her temperature. Dropping a bit. Not much, but it's movement in the right direction. The air felt a little lighter, though no one dared to say the word relief. Ava leaned back slightly. "If her fever keeps coming down, we might buy some more time." Mark nodded. "But we're close to the edge. One wrong turn and—" He stopped himself. He didn't need to finish. The canyon walls understood the rest. Riley felt the cub shift. He lifted his head, eyes focused on the lioness's face. His breathing came in small, uneven puffs, but his voice, though weak, rose in a tiny pained call. It was a sound full of longing, fear, and hope intertwined. And for the first time since they had found her, the lioness responded. Her ear twitched, her nose flared, and her chest rose slightly deeper with her next breath. A connection, fragile but unmistakable, sparked in that moment. "She hears him," Riley whispered, her voice cracking. "She knows he's safe." Mark stared, amazed at the shift. "It's helping her. His presence, his voice, it's stabilizing her. I've never seen anything like it." Ava wiped her eyes quickly. "This family. They're holding on to each other." The lioness's breathing steadied again, still labored, still weak, but less chaotic, less frantic, more intentional. Riley felt her shoulders loosen slightly for the first time in hours. "She's not done fighting," she whispered. Mark exhaled. "No, but she'll need every ounce of strength for what comes next." Outside, the last sliver of sun dipped behind the canyon rim. The crevice grew cooler. Shadows deepened. And yet, within that cramped, dusty hollow, 3 rescuers and a tiny cub witnessed something powerful. A mother refusing to let go. A baby refusing to give up. A heartbeat refusing to die. And hope, faint, fragile but alive, began to breathe again. Riley held on to that hope tightly, feeling it pulse through her arms as the cub trembled against her chest. In the narrow crevice, the air had cooled only slightly, but every breath the lioness took felt steadier than the last, as if her body were clawing its way back from a place most never returned from. Mark's hands remained steady as he monitored her vitals, his focus sharp despite the long hours already spent fighting for her life. Ava hovered near the entrance, readying supplies, adjusting the portable fan, and checking the ultrasound for any flicker of change. The canyon outside had darkened into a deep blue-gray. The last traces of sunlight had vanished behind the sandstone walls, leaving only the artificial glow of their equipment to cut through the gathering dusk. A wind began to rise beyond the crevice, low and restless, carrying dust and the scent of a coming storm. "We need to prepare for transport," Mark said quietly. "She's not stable, but she's stable enough to move. And staying here is too dangerous." Riley nodded, feeling a surge of urgency replace the fear that had weighed on her chest. "We can get her to the stretcher," she said. "We just have to do it gently." Ava turned toward the lioness, her brow furrowing. "And we need to do it before the storm hits. Listen to the wind. There's sand coming." The cub lifted his head as if he understood. He let out a small cry, softer than before but filled with insistence. Riley stroked his back gently. "We're going to help her," she whispered. "And you're coming with us." Mark repositioned the IV bag, ensuring it was secure for the move. "We're going to support her head, relieve pressure on the abdomen, and keep that drip line stable," he said. "Ava, bring in the stretcher." Ava nodded and slipped back outside, her silhouette disappearing for a few seconds before she returned, dragging the padded rescue stretcher. It barely fit through the narrow opening. Riley set the cub down beside her and moved to help adjust the straps and cushioning. The lioness watched them through half-lidded eyes, too weak to react, but something in her gaze looked calmer, less panicked, less lost. "She's aware," Riley whispered. "She knows we're helping her." Mark moved into position at her front shoulders. "All right," he said, voice steady. "On my count. Riley, support her abdomen from the side. Ava, steady her hips and help slide the stretcher under her." The cub shuffled closer to his mother's face, nudging her cheek with a small paw. Riley gently scooped him up before he wandered too close to Mark's hands. The cub cried once, then nestled into Riley's arm, watching everything with wide, frightened eyes. "Easy," Mark murmured, as he slipped his hands beneath the lioness's shoulders. "We've got you." Riley angled herself beside the lioness, hands carefully supporting the swollen belly. She could feel the trembling beneath her palms, muscles fighting to hold on, fighting not to collapse again. Ava took her place near the hindquarters, her face tight with concentration. "1," Mark said. "2, 3. They lifted carefully, shifting her weight by inches. The lioness winced, letting out a weak, breathy moan. Riley steadied her belly, murmuring soft encouragement. Ava guided the stretcher beneath her, adjusting its angle so the lioness could be lowered onto it without putting pressure on the abdomen. "Easy. Easy. There," Mark whispered. The lioness's head fell gently against the padded support. Her breaths were labored, but consistent. Ava secured the front straps around her chest and shoulders, leaving the midsection free. Riley kept her hand on the lioness's head, letting the cub lean forward and nuzzle his mother's cheek. The storm beyond the crevice grew louder. Sand tapped against the rocks like tiny fingers drumming a warning. A gust of wind swept into the hollow, chilling the sweat on Riley's forehead. "We need to move," Ava said. "That wind's picking up fast." Mark nodded. "Riley, carry the cub. Keep him calm. Ava, take the front. I'll guide the back." Riley held the cub close, his tiny claws gripping the edge of her vest. The rescuers lifted the stretcher carefully, inching it toward the entrance. The space was narrow, forcing them to angle the lioness sideways, pausing every few feet to readjust. Dust swirled in the air outside, the sky shifting into a darker shade with each passing second. The storm was rolling in quicker than any of them expected. The first sting of sand hit Riley's cheek as she stepped out into the open. "Here we go," Mark called out over the wind. "Nice and steady." The storm wind surged, blowing grit across the valley floor. Ava shielded her eyes with one arm while keeping her grip firm on the stretcher. The lioness shuddered as the cold air met her fevered skin, a soft whine escaping her throat. "We're almost there," Riley shouted. The rescue vehicle was only 30 yards away, its headlights cutting through the swirling sand. But each step felt heavier as the wind pushed against them, fighting their progress, testing their resolve. The cub wiggled anxiously in Riley's arms, burying his face deeper into her chest whenever a gust hit. She tightened her hold around him, murmuring, "It's okay, baby. We've got her. We've got you." Halfway to the vehicle, a powerful gust slammed into them. Mark dug his boots into the sand to keep from losing balance. Ava shouted, "Careful! Shift left! Left!" The stretcher tilted dangerously. Riley lunged forward, steadying the lioness's head before it could jolt too hard. The cub cried out in fear, but she held firm, grounding both him and herself with sheer determination. The wind eased for a moment, just enough for them to push forward again. "Almost there!" Mark yelled over the storm. Finally, they reached the rescue vehicle. Ava swung open the back doors while Riley gently soothed the cub. Mark and Ava lifted the stretcher inside, securing the lioness in place with padded straps that prevented rolling or jostling. As soon as the lioness was settled, Riley climbed into the back, keeping the cub pressed close. Ava jumped in behind her, closing the doors tightly against the storm. Mark slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The wind howled around them, but inside the dim glow of the vehicle's lights, the lioness lay stable, weak, trembling, but alive. The cub rested his head on his mother's foreleg, letting out a soft, relieved sound. Riley stroked his back gently, whispering, "We're taking her home. Hold on. We're taking her to safety." The engine rumbled. The headlights cut through the rising sandstorm, and for the first time since their ordeal began, the rescuers carried the lioness, not toward danger, but toward the faint promise of survival waiting beyond the storm. Riley sat beside her in the back of the rescue vehicle, cradling the cub close. His trembling had slowed, but his breaths were shallow, his wide eyes moving constantly between his mother and the strangers fighting to save her. Every jolt of the road made him flinch. Every groan from the lioness made him whimper softly into Riley's vest. Ava held the ultrasound scanner steady against the lioness's abdomen as best she could during the drive. The screen flickered with each bump, but the heartbeats, those tiny flickers of life, were still visible. Too strong, one barely clinging to its fragile rhythm. Ava swallowed, her voice almost lost beneath the roar of the storm outside. Her weakest cub. It's slowing again. Riley tightened her hold on the cub. "He's still trying," she whispered, speaking to the unborn life inside the lioness as much as to the one in her arms. "Just hang on a little longer." The lioness's chest rose unevenly, her breaths short and erratic. Her head rolled slightly to the side, resting against the padded stretcher with a heavy thud. Riley reached out, steadying her with gentle fingertips. The mother's ears twitched faintly at the touch, but she didn't have the strength to lift her head. Mark's voice came through from the driver's seat, low and strained. "We're 5 minutes out. Storm's slowing us down more than I thought. How's she doing back there?" "Not good," Ava called out. "Her contractions are stronger. She's losing strength. If her fever spikes again, we might lose her before we even get her inside." Riley leaned closer to the lioness, pressing her forehead gently against the mother's cheek. The heat radiating from her fur was alarming, still too high. "Please stay with us," Riley whispered. "Your babies need you. Your boy here needs you." The cub in her arms chirped a soft cry at the sound of her voice, pressing his face deeper into Riley's chest. His tiny paw reached toward his mother, the gesture small but full of a desperate longing. The vehicle bounced again, as they crossed a rough patch of desert road. Ava steadied the ultrasound unit with one hand and adjusted the fan with the other. Her pressure is dropping. We have to get her inside. The oxygen, the cooling blankets, the meds, they're ready. We just need to get her there. Riley nodded, though her heart hammered with dread. We're almost there, sweetheart, she murmured to the lioness. Just a little further. The storm outside battered the vehicle like fists of wind and sand. The wipers struggled to keep the windshield clear, but Mark forced the car forward, inch by inch, navigating the treacherous darkness. At last, through the thick, swirling dust, two faint lights appeared, the entrance of the Silver Ridge Wildlife Center. We made it, Ava said, breath catching with relief. Mark pulled the vehicle to a stop beneath the awning. He jumped out immediately, shouting toward the entrance. We need a trauma team now. Pregnant lioness, critical condition. Two staff members rushed out with a rolling gurney. Riley held the cub close as she stepped aside, allowing Mark and Ava to guide the stretcher out of the vehicle. The lioness groaned as she was lifted, her body sagging heavily into the padded surface. Her paws twitched weakly, and her breathing hitched in a frightening rhythm. Inside the facility, bright lights cut through the shadows. The sterile hallway felt like another world, cool, clean, and wrapped in the low hum of machines. They wheeled the lioness into the emergency bay, the cub's cries following close behind. Mark moved swiftly, switching the portable IV line to the larger setup in the room. Temperature first, he ordered. Cooling blankets now. Ava and another tech lifted the lioness's torso gently, while Riley held the cub and watched with fear tightening around her ribs. A cooling blanket was draped across the lioness's body. Fans circulated cold air around her. The room buzzed with movement. Riley stepped closer. Her voice trembled. Her eyes. She's not opening them anymore. Mark pressed two fingers gently against the lioness's neck. Her pulse is faint, but it's there. He turned to Ava. Check the heartbeats again. Ava nodded, placing the probe against the lioness's abdomen. Riley held her breath. The screen flickered. The first cub's heartbeat thumped strong and steady. The second cub's heartbeat pulsed clearly as well. Then the faint flicker of the third slowed, flickered again, slowed further. Ava's voice broke. It's barely there. Riley's heart dropped. The cub pressed his face into her arm, as if he too could sense the danger surrounding the sibling he hadn't met yet. Mark breathed in sharply. We're running out of time. If we don't operate soon, we're going to lose the little one, and maybe the mother too. Riley stepped closer, her voice trembling but firm. Tell us what to do, we're with you. Ava looked from the screen to the lioness, then to the cub in Riley's arms. We need to prep for surgery now, she said softly. The weakest cub, he doesn't have long, and if she slips again, we won't get her back a second time. Mark nodded toward the prep doors. Riley, stay with the cub. He needs you. We'll take his mother in. The cub let out a soft whimper, staring at the doors as they began to close. A tiny sound, half cry, half plea, echoed through the hall. Riley held him close, whispering into his fur. They're saving her. They're saving all of them. Hold on. Behind the swinging glass, the emergency lights flickered on, casting a pale glow over the lioness as she was wheeled into surgery. The countdown had begun, and every second was a battle for 3 small lives, and for the mother who had already fought harder than anyone could imagine. Riley stood outside the surgery doors, holding the trembling cub close as the light above the operating room flicked to red. The hallway felt too bright, too quiet, too sterile for the raw fear pulsing inside her. The cub pressed himself into her chest, tiny paws gripping her shirt, as if she were the last warm, safe thing he could cling to. Behind the glass, Mark and Ava moved quickly around the lioness's motionless form. Machines hummed, beeping in steady and uncertain rhythms. Surgical lights bathed everything in a cold glow, casting sharp shadows on the walls. Riley could see only glimpses. Mark adjusting the oxygen mask, Ava preparing the incision site, another tech laying out tools with trembling hands. The cub let out a tiny, aching cry. "I know," Riley whispered. "I know, baby. They're helping her." "Hang on." A soft gust of warm air from the heating vent brushed across them, but the cold fear in Riley's stomach only grew. The lioness had made it this far, surviving dehydration, fever, exhaustion, and the brutal trek through the canyon. But surgery was another battlefield entirely, and one misstep could take all that strength away forever. Inside, Ava lifted the ultrasound probe one last time before surgery began. Riley watched the screen flicker, 2 heartbeats thumping with stubborn determination, the third pulsing so faintly it looked like a whisper on the screen. Mark's face tightened. "We're losing the weak one. We need to move." Ava nodded, her voice steady but soft. "Then let's get them out and give them a chance." Mark made the first incision with calm precision. Riley instinctively hugged the cub tighter, turning her body so he wouldn't see the sudden movement inside the bright room. But he still whimpered, as though he knew the moment had shifted into something dangerous. Riley lowered her forehead to his. "She's strong," she whispered. "Stronger than any of us. She's doing this for all of you." Mark worked quickly, guided by Ava's steady hands. The first cub slipped into the world limp and silent. For a moment, Riley's heart froze. Then the small body twitched, a weak cry escaping as Ava cleared the airway and rubbed its tiny chest. "One's breathing," Ava called. Riley felt an unexpected surge of hope. The cub in her arms lifted his head, ears perked at the faint sound of life on the other side of the glass. The second cub arrived moments later, smaller, weaker than the first, but responsive. Its little paws curled as it gasped gently, as though waking from a long sleep. Mark passed it to the tech waiting with a warm towel and oxygen mask. Riley closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a silent thank you to whatever force watched over them. Then came the third, the one whose heartbeat had wavered for hours, the cub that hadn't given up, even when its heart faltered again and again. Mark reached carefully, sliding his hands beneath the fragile body. The moment he lifted the tiny cub, Riley could see it was far too still. Its small limbs hung limp, its chest unmoving, its fur pale beneath the surgical lights. Ava's voice cracked. "No response. Not yet." Mark didn't hesitate. He placed 2 fingers gently along the cub's tiny ribs and began rubbing softly, then a little firmer. "Come on, little one," he murmured. "Stay with us." The cub in Riley's arms suddenly cried out, a sharp, piercing sound that echoed down the hallway. Riley tightened her hold, her own breath hitching as she watched through the glass. Ava cleared the newborn's airway. Mark rubbed its chest again. A few seconds passed. Too many, too long, without movement. "He's fading," Ava whispered. "No," Mark said sharply. "Not on my watch." He leaned down and breathed a tiny puff of air gently into the newborn's muzzle, then rubbed its chest again, faster, more urgent. Riley felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Please, please don't let him go." The cub in her arms cried again, the sound trembling, desperate. Then, a twitch, barely visible, but there. Mark froze. "Did you see that?" Ava leaned in. "Again, look." The newborn's paw moved, just a tiny shake, then another. A soft, broken squeak escaped its throat, fragile and thin as a thread of wind. Riley gasped, hand over her mouth. "He's breathing," Ava breathed. "It's shallow, but he's breathing." Mark let out a shuddering sigh. "Welcome to the world, little fighter." The cub was placed under a warming lamp beside its siblings, each tiny heartbeat visible on the small monitors. All three were alive, weak, fragile, but breathing, living. Riley pressed a kiss to the cub's head. "Your brothers and sisters are here," she whispered. "They made it. Your mama did it." But the battle wasn't over. Not for the lioness. A sudden flatline beep pierced the air. Mark snapped around. "Her blood pressure just crashed." Riley's heart lurched. The cub in her arms tensed again. Ava moved fast. "Adrenaline, now!" Mark injected the dose and began compressions just above the lioness's foreleg. The surgical lights reflected off the sweat on his forehead as he pushed, steady and focused. "Come on," he murmured. "You fought too hard to leave now." The beeping continued, flat, cold, merciless. The cub in Riley's arms whimpered, burying himself into her chest. Then, a blip, a beep, a second beep. A faint but unmistakable rhythm returned. Ava exhaled a sob of relief. "That's it. That's it. She's coming back." Mark wiped his brow, voice thick. "She's still with us." Riley let out a trembling breath, hugging the cub so tightly he squeaked. "She's alive," she whispered. "She's still fighting." The cub pressed his cheek to her chest, as if hearing and understanding every word. Inside the operating room, the lioness lay weak but living, her newborns breathing beneath warming lights. Machines hummed a fragile lullaby of life. Riley looked through the glass, heart full. The mother had returned from the edge once more, but dawn had not yet come. And the hardest part, the long hours of waiting, healing, and hoping, was only beginning. The hall outside the surgery room had gone quiet, except for the soft hum of machines and the distant echo of the storm winding down outside the center. Riley sat on a padded bench, the cub curled tightly against her, his small body rising and falling with quick, frightened breaths. His fur was warm against her arms, but beneath that warmth she could feel the exhaustion, the fear, the raw emotional unraveling that only a young creature could experience. The red light above the operating room flickered off. A pale glow filled the hallway as the doors slid open, and Mark stepped out first, peeling off his gloves with slow, deliberate movements. Ava followed close behind, wiping her forehead with the back of her sleeve. Both carried the kind of exhaustion that only came after pulling someone back from the edge. Not once, but over and over. Riley rose instantly. "How is she?" Mark offered a tired but gentle nod. "She made it through surgery. She's critical, but she's stable." Ava added softly, "All three cubs are breathing. The smallest one will need oxygen support, but he responded better than we expected." The cub in Riley's arms let out a tiny chirp at the sound of Ava's voice, almost as if asking for confirmation. Riley kissed his soft head. "You hear that? They're alive. All of them." Mark motioned toward the double doors. "We're moving them into the recovery ward. Come on. You both should be there." Riley followed them through the winding hallway. The cub clung to her shirt the entire way, his claws pressing lightly into the fabric, a small but desperate anchor to the only thing he trusted at the moment. Inside the recovery room, the lights were softer, warmer. A padded enclosure had been set up for the three newborns, each placed beneath a small warming lamp. The two stronger cubs wriggled weakly, their tiny bodies curled tight as they breathed on their own. The smallest one, the fighter Riley had prayed for, lay with a minuscule oxygen mask gently placed over his muzzle. His chest rose slowly, unevenly, but every rise was a victory. Riley approached them with the older cub still nestled in her arms. He lifted his head, ears perked, and let out a soft, yearning sound. Riley lowered him closer so he could see the newborns. His eyes widened, his small face shifting with a complexity of emotions: confusion, recognition, relief. A faint squeak came from beneath the oxygen mask. The older cub pressed his tiny paw against the side of the enclosure. Ava smiled gently. "Look at that. He knows." Riley felt her heart tighten. "He does. These are his siblings." Mark stepped to the lioness's recovery station, just a few feet away. She lay on her side, heavily sedated, her chest rising and falling under the influence of oxygen support and cooling therapy. Riley moved closer, still holding the cub. She leaned in slightly, brushing a soft hand along the lioness's cheek. "She's so still," Riley whispered. "She's resting," Mark replied. "Her body finally has a chance to recover." The cub whimpered softly at the sight of his mother. Riley lowered him gently to the edge of the recovery bed, keeping her hands around him in case he slipped. He stretched out, resting his head near hers, as close as he could safely get. A tiny, fragile sound left the lioness's throat, barely a vibration, barely a breath, but unmistakably a response. Ava covered her mouth, eyes misting. "She knows he's there." Riley breathed out shakily. She fought so hard for him. The cub stayed perfectly still, listening, waiting. His tail curled around Riley's wrist, holding on as though she were the bridge between fear and safety. Mark checked the lioness's vitals again, adjusting the oxygen flow. "Her heart rate is steady," he said quietly. "That's the best sign we could hope for right now." Hours drifted by in a slow, almost sacred silence. The storm outside passed, leaving the center wrapped in a calm, muted dawn light. Riley remained at the lioness's side the entire time, the cub sleeping in her arms, waking only when a machine's beep changed or when one of the newborns squeaked. It was just after sunrise when a soft shift happened. The lioness's paw moved, barely an inch, but enough to catch Riley's breath. The cub lifted his head, his ears twitching. He pressed closer, a hopeful squeal rising in his throat. Then another movement. The lioness's eyelids fluttered. Mark leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Easy. Take your time. That's it." Her eyes opened slightly, clouded, tired, but aware. Her gaze drifted, unfocused at first, before settling on the shape pressed against her. Her cub. The little one cried out, small and trembling. The lioness's paw slowly extended, touching his fur with the softest brush of her claws. A mother's first conscious gesture after surviving the impossible. Riley's throat tightened. She placed her hand over the lioness's paw, steadying it gently. "He never left you," she whispered. "He brought us to you. He saved you." The lioness blinked slowly, her breathing deepening. She shifted her head just enough to nuzzle the edge of the cub's fur. He let out a high, relieved chirp, pressing into her touch. Ava wiped tears from her cheeks openly now. This is incredible." Mark nodded, his voice thick. "I've never seen anything like it." The newborns continued to sleep beneath their warming lamps, unaware of the miracle unfolding just a few feet away. Riley watched the lioness's eyes soften as she recognized her surviving cub. It was the quietest, most powerful moment of the entire night. One family shattered by danger. One cub fighting through the wilderness alone. One mother pulled back from the brink again and again. 3 newborns breathing despite all odds. Riley placed a hand gently over the lioness's shoulder. "Rest," she whispered. "Your babies are safe. All of them." The lioness closed her eyes slowly, exhaustion overtaking her again. But not fear. This time she slept with her cub pressed near, warm and secure. Outside the recovery room window, the sun finally rose over Henderson Valley. And in that soft morning light, a broken family began to mend. Not through miracles alone, but through the relentless courage of a mother, the determination of a tiny cub, and the people who refused to let hope slip away. The golden rays spilled across the tiled floor, warming the edges of the room, brushing gently against the lioness's fur, as if welcoming her back into a world she had nearly left behind. Riley sat beside the recovery bed, her hand resting on the lioness's foreleg, while the cub slept curled against his mother's side. Hours had passed since the surgery, but fatigue hadn't loosened its grip on any of them. Still, for the first time in what felt like days, the tension in the air had softened, replaced by a quiet, reverent calm. Across the room, under the soft glow of warming lamps, the newborn cubs shifted gently in their padded nest. The strongest of the trio stretched his tiny paws, releasing a sleepy squeak before tucking himself tighter into the blanket. His sibling rolled toward him with a slow, wobbly motion. The smallest cub, the fighter whose heartbeat had flickered so faintly, breathed through his miniature oxygen mask, chest rising in fragile, determined rhythm. Mark entered quietly, carrying a clipboard and a steaming mug of coffee that looked far stronger than anything meant for a normal morning. His eyes softened when he saw Riley still awake. "You didn't rest," he said gently. Riley shook her head. "Couldn't. Not until I knew she was really out of danger." Mark looked at the lioness's vitals. "She's stabilizing more with each hour. Her fever's down. Hydration's improving. She's responding exactly the way we hoped." Riley brushed her fingers lightly along the lioness's cheek. "She's a fighter." "She always was," Mark said. "And her cub, that little guy lit a fire under every one of us." A soft rustle drew their attention. The lioness stirred, just slightly, but enough to make the cub at her side lift his head. He blinked sleepily, then pressed closer, tucking his face into her fur. The lioness's eyes opened, not the shallow, clouded flutter of earlier, but a fuller, clearer gaze. She looked around in slow, measured movements, her breath steady. Then she saw her cub, leaning into her side with unrestrained devotion. A gentle sound escaped her throat, low, weak, but undeniably tender. Riley felt a lump rise in her throat. "She knows exactly where she is," she whispered. Mark smiled softly. "She knows she made it." Ava stepped into the room then, carrying a fresh blanket and a small tray of supplies. When she saw the lioness awake, her face lit up with relief. "Look who's back with us," she murmured. "Good morning, Mama." The lioness watched her cautiously, but without fear. She shifted her paw, bringing it closer to her cub. He responded immediately, nuzzling into her chest with a soft cry. Riley leaned closer, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. This is the moment he's been waiting for, all night. The cub pressed his head beneath his mother's chin, tiny tail fluttering in a delicate, joyous motion. The lioness nudged him gently with her nose. Weak, but full of the strength only a mother's love could hold after surviving the impossible, Ava moved toward the warming nest. "Should we bring the newborns to her? Just close enough for her to see?" Mark shook his head softly. "Not yet. She's too weak to move and they need more time under the lamps. But soon. Very soon." Riley looked toward the newborns, her eyes softening. "They're so small." "They're fighters," Ava said. "All three." The smallest cub twitched then, a faint movement that made Ava smile. Especially that one. Moments passed in quiet admiration as the family breathed together in the gentle morning light. The lioness remained alert, watching her older cub with a calm, maternal tenderness that filled the room with warmth. Her heartbeat, once frantic and fading, now pulsed with steady resolve. Riley stroked the older cub's back. "He saved all of them," she murmured. "He led us to her. He never gave up." Mark nodded, voice thick with emotion. "A cub that brave deserves a future. A long one." Ava stepped closer, smiling. "And now he has one. They all do." For the first time since the ordeal began, Riley allowed herself to relax. Really relax. She leaned back in the chair, still resting her hand on the lioness's foreleg, feeling the gentle warmth beneath her palm. The cub curled into his mother again, purring faintly, a soft vibration of trust and relief. Outside the center's windows, the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light across the valley. The remnants of the storm had cleared, leaving the sky bright and wide, an open expanse that seemed to celebrate the survival unfolding within the recovery ward. A new day, a new beginning, a new family. Riley whispered, "You're safe now, all of you." The lioness closed her eyes, breathing peacefully, with her cub nestled against her side. The newborn slept, fragile but alive, and for the first time in a long, harrowing night, hope was no longer just a faint flicker. It was a warm, steady sunrise over Henderson Valley. A sunrise that promised healing, life, and the continuation of a story that had nearly ended before it began. And it all started with one desperate cry from a tiny lion cub, a cry that saved his entire family. If this little hero touched your heart today, tap 0 in the comments to let him know he did something incredible. And if you want more true rescue stories filled with courage, hope, and second chances, make sure to subscribe. Your support helps us bring the next life-changing story straight to you.